Every golfer I know has heard of Ben Hogan's 5 Lessons. It's by far and away the best-selling golf improvement book of all time, and to this day it is still #1 on Amazon. But there is another book, one that's packed with timeless, practical advice that, in my opinion, has more actionable advice on how to become a better golfer. It was written in the early 1990s, but it contained wisdom dating back as far as the early 1900s. And yet so many ideas in this book still hold up. In fact, the longer I coach and play this game, the more I realize that this book might have been the smartest thing ever written about golf. Let's talk about Harvey Penick's Little Red Book. In this video, I'm going to share some of my favorite quotes in the book, and I'm going to wax poetic a bit on why these concepts are still relevant today. Of course, I won't get to everything because there are so many wonderful takeaways, and I think it's required reading for any golfer who wants to get better. Hi, my name is Jon Sherman. In case you don't know me, I'm the author of The 4 Foundations of Golf, co-host of the Sweet Spot podcast, and PGA Tour coach. But most importantly, I'm a golfer just like you. And on this channel, I am teaching you how to play golf, not how to play golf swing. I think what's so special about the Little Red Book is actually the story of how it came about. So Harvey Penick was a legendary instructor. He coached players of all levels and of course legendary golfers like Ben Crenshaw and Tom Kite. His Little Red Book was a collection of his notes throughout his entire career that he kept locked away in a briefcase. And over the decades, golf writer after golf writer tried to convince him to publish them in the book because they knew what he had was gold. He decided not to do that for almost his entire career because he wanted to pass them along to his son, who was an aspiring teaching professional as well. But later on in his life, Bud Shrake, who co-wrote the Little Red Book with him, finally convinced Harvey, and his son was the one who finally convinced him to share this knowledge with the entire world right before he had passed. So the first quote that I love from the introduction of the book shows that golf advice is timeless. He wrote, "What made my Little Red Book special was not what was written in it had never been said before. It was that what it says about golf has stood the test of time." I think this is a really important concept because nowadays we have so much information about the golf swing, modern analytics, and as much as I try to share modern info and what's changed and what we've learned, there are still so many concepts that golfers figured out well over 100 years ago that are still relevant today. And I do my best to try and spread that message. And even though that many of the teachings in this book are decades old, I still think that plenty of it is relevant to a golfer who's a beginner, intermediate, or even an aspiring tour pro. So the first page of the book, I would argue, is probably the best singular page written in any golf book ever. And this is perhaps the most famous quote from the book. He wrote, "When I ask you to take an aspirin, please don't take the whole bottle." And what Harvey was referring to here was that when he gave a piece of swing advice to one of his students, it was small, it wasn't complicated, there weren't 20 different parts to it. But he knew that every golfer had a tendency to take the whole bottle. They would overdo it, they would exaggerate way too much what he had said. And I think this quote is way more relevant today because of this platform that I'm on right now, YouTube, and other platforms. I think if Mr. Penick was alive today, he'd be shocked at how much swing advice is available to golfers. It's not even the whole bottle anymore. We have the entire factory of aspirin at our disposal. I'm always trying to warn golfers that the algorithm is going to feed you swing tip after swing tip, and a lot of players think that the more they consume, the better they're going to be on the golf course, and it's quite the opposite. So I would heed this warning from Harvey that you don't want to take the whole aspirin bottle. I would suggest that if you can take lessons, you stick with one voice, or if you find an online coach on YouTube or elsewhere that has a philosophy that you love, stick with that one voice. Do not take the whole bottle. It can destroy your game, and obviously that's incredibly unpleasant. So the next quote from the opening page of the book refers to something that I talk a lot about to this day, which is club face control. Harvey wrote, "When teaching or learning what is wrong with the swing, first decide if the thing to work on is the swing itself or the angle of the club face at impact." I believe this piece of advice was well ahead of its time because ball flight laws were technically wrong when Harvey was teaching. We used to think that the path of the club determined the start angle. But Harvey knew that where the club face was pointing at impact, also referred to as face angle, was crucially important for the golf swing. So we now know that club face angle is responsible for about 65 to 80% of the start direction of the golf ball. And I believe it's the glue that holds everything together. It keeps your tee shots in play. It controls the curvature of your golf ball. One thing that I've always worked on in my swing is having a keen awareness of where my club face is throughout my golf swing and certainly at impact, and adjusting from there. And there were plenty of teachers like Harvey who thought this way back in the day. Again, this has not changed. The physics of impact have not changed. The last thing you want to do is break apart your golf swing and go on a wild goose chase, when a lot of the times, if golfers focused on their club face control and thought about where the orientation of the face is throughout the swing and at impact, and use that as their guiding light when looking at their ball flight and making adjustments, a whole new world can open up for you. I have a separate video on this on my channel about how to practice this way. But again, I think when we talk about the skills of what it takes to become a better golfer, impact location, which I'll get into shortly, ground contact, the biggest one to conquer is club face control. And the more you're aware of it, the more you focus on it, I think the better chance you have, rather than thinking about your golf swing in its entirety, which again can lead you down on a wild goose chase. So those two quotes are from the first page of the book. And again, I think they might be the most influential and impactful tips that a golfer of any level can use. Now let's move to my next favorite topic, impact location. Harvey wrote, "Many average golfers are not sure which part of the club face is striking the ball. It's very simple to find out. Take a can of talcum powder with you to the range, powder the ball, hit it, and look at the club face." So if you've been consuming golf improvement content online for the last decade or so, you know that it's become very popular to get a can of Dr. Scholl's Odor-X spray and find out where you're making impact on the club face. Now, I hadn't read the Little Red Book in over 15 years and I had forgotten a lot about it. And I actually forgot that Harvey mentioned this in the book. And again, it's incredibly simple but impactful advice. There is nothing more important than where you're making impact on the club face. Whether it was 50 years ago with inferior technology or even today with better club technology, the way you hit the most quality shots off the tee with your approach clubs or even your wedges is striking the ball closer to the center of gravity or the sweet spot. In other words, you're letting the golf club do what it's designed to do. And again, if you're focused too much on swing mechanics and things that are irrelevant to these basic things like impact location, you are on a wild goose chase. So Harvey said it decades ago, and people like myself say it today. Spray the face, know where you're making contact on the face at impact, and challenge yourself to strike different parts of the face, which I will get into in his next quote, which I thought was unbelievable. Now, this was for the golfer who was struggling with an unfortunate problem called the shanks. He wrote, "Try to conscientiously hit every iron shot on the toe of the club until you stop shanking." So if you listen to myself or Adam Young on The Sweet Spot, you know that we're always talking about doing the opposite of your fault, which is what I would call my fight fire with fire practice method. And of course, I didn't invent this. Harvey was talking about it decades ago, and he certainly wasn't the only instructor to do it. But I think whether it's where you're striking on the club face, the curvature of your ball, or even the trajectory of your ball flight, doing the opposite of your fault can open up a whole new door in your golf swing. And more importantly, it gets you to self-organize in an athletic way where you're not even really thinking about what you're doing. There was another story about how Harvey worked with one of his students who was hitting the ball too high and likely had an early release and was kind of scooping it at impact with their hands behind the ball. So simply what he did was he left this golfer underneath a tree and literally walked away for an hour or two and came back. And essentially what he was asking the golfer to do was self-organize their swing so they could keep the ball below the tree branch. This is a technique that is pretty popular in motor learning in multiple sports, but of course his genius knew that this was a way to get students to achieve the goal by presenting some type of physical challenge to them. In order to hit the ball lower, that golfer might have experimented with moving the ball back further in their stance. They might have started to lean the shaft forward. Again, they were trying to solve the problem like an athlete and self-organize. And I think this is one of the best practice methods that anyone can do, whether it's where you're striking it on the club face, your ground interaction, if you're slicing it too much. Can you challenge yourself to do the opposite? And some interesting things will likely occur that you can bring out to the golf course. There's another great anecdote in the book where Mr. Penick was sharing a conversation he had with Tommy Armour, who many of you know was a legendary golfer in the early 1900s. And Tommy Armour told Harvey that a lot of golfers would ask him how to put backspin on the ball. And his answer was simple. You just need to learn to strike it more on the center of the face. And more importantly, he kind of said the question was irrelevant because most golfers he watched in his day weren't even getting the ball past the pin. And I think this is really interesting because obviously it relates back to the simple idea of impact solving a lot of issues in your golf swing. But more importantly, it brings up another problem that golfers are still struggling with. They don't get the ball to the green or even past the pin. I've shared with you on this channel, in my book, and plenty of other places that when you look at all of the shot tracking databases in golf, you can see that on average, golfers of all levels are missing greens short. They're not taking enough club and they're not striking it well enough. So this was bothering golfers in the early 1900s, and over 100 years later, it's still a problem. And later on in the book, Harvey actually shared this quote: "The average golfer seldom hits a middle iron approach past the pin." And he brought up the scenario that a lot of golfers face, which is when they're stuck between clubs, when they have a yardage that might be between their 8-iron and 7-iron, or maybe a 5-iron and 4-iron, and they're faced with the decision where they have to take less club and swing harder, or take a lower lofted club and try and take something off of it. Now, Harvey suggested that most golfers should take less club and swing harder, and I would add maybe an asterisk to this at this point because I've seen some tests where the results are wildly different. So if you have access to a launch monitor or you're on a range, I think this is a great test every golfer should do. Take a yardage that is firmly in between, let's say your 7-iron and 8-iron, and try and hit a bunch of shots where you're swinging harder with the higher lofted club, or trying to swing it, let's say 80 or 90% with the lower lofted club. You're essentially trying to figure out what club and what swing speed gives you the best chance of keeping your dispersion tighter to your target. For example, for myself, I do better with what Harvey suggested, which is swinging harder with the higher lofted club. But I actually believe that a lot of golfers would be better off taking more club because they won't strike it as well and they won't make some erratic, crazy swing trying to swing too hard. But you are all unique snowflakes and you can test it yourself to get the answer so you have more confidence on the course when you're stuck with these in-between decisions. So here's another piece of timeless advice that was true 50 to 100 years ago and it's true today. Harvey simply said, how to knock 5 strokes off your game. Practice with your putter and your wedges because most golfers ignore it. They did back then, they loved whacking balls on the driving range and hitting their driver, and it's the same story today. So I'd love to add a little bit of color to this with modern analytics. If you've read Every Shot Counts from Mark Brody, we now know that scoring differential between golfers is mostly explained by the long game. In other words, your tee shots and approach shots are about 2/3 of scoring differential between any level of golfer, and the remaining third is explained by your wedge and putting. Not everyone has unlimited practice time. Not everyone can work on their full swing enough to move that needle in their long game, but what Harvey said back then rings true today. Most golfers can make very quick progress if they just spend some time chipping and putting and working on their speed control. It's a way to get a quick win with your scoring. The only asterisk that I would add is that most people eventually will hit a wall where the more time they spend will not have as much influence on their scoring versus, let's say, working with their driver or irons. But make no mistake, most golfers ignore it, and if you just spend some time getting proficient with a very simple wedge technique around the greens, working on your speed control and 5-footers, it is an easy way to knock strokes off your game quickly. Now with that, let's transition to Harvey's advice on putting. This was a really short chapter in the book, but I think he pretty much outlined a perfect system and thought on how to become a better putter. And there were really 3 quotes that stuck out to me. The first quote was, "Never allow yourself to think about what is riding on the putt." So one of the arguments that I get into with golfers on social media is when I say that putting is statistically not the most important part of the game. Some golfers will say it's 50% of your scoring, While that might be true in absolute strokes, it's not true in their relative importance. Again, refer to Mark Brody's book, and he found out that putting is only responsible for about 15% of scoring differential between golfers. And why is that? Well, a simple explanation is a 12-inch putt does not have the same influence on your score as much as a drive or iron shot. You can't hit that putt out of bounds, or you can't hit it 300 yards down the middle of the fairway and give yourself a huge advantage. But that's not to say that putting isn't important. It is still really important for the momentum of your rounds and your mental state. But here's what I think is awesome about this quote, and not allowing yourself to think about what is riding on the putt. So if you believe that putting is the most important part of golf and that every score you make on every hole is solidified by your putter, then you're gonna be standing over a 10-footer for par or bogey and say, well, if I miss this putt, obviously I'll make bogey or double, and if I make it, I can save a full stroke. It's not that simple. All of the shots that happened before on that hole contributed to the fact that maybe you were 10 or 15 feet away versus 2 feet away for a tap-in par. But either way, this is incredible advice. You essentially have to trick yourself to stop thinking about the results and get more into the process. The more you think about the importance of the putt, the harder it is to actually make a stroke and control your speed and actually make it, and worse, not blast it 5 or 6 feet by the hole and 3-putt. So I've been fortunate enough to spend several hundred hours on the phone with one of the best putters in the world over the last couple of years, Mackenzie Hughes. The one thing that we go over and over again with his putting is that he's at his best when he's not thinking about what the putt means. This is crucially important for him on a Friday afternoon, maybe coming down the stretch where he has to make a cut, or if he's coming down the final stretch of a tournament on Sunday. He makes more putts when he thinks less about what the putt means and controlling the one thing that he can, which is his intent, his process, and things that are within his control. And I think this is a really basic system that all golfers should follow with their putting. You have to figure out a way to distract yourself from what the putt means. Another great quote from putting in this chapter is, "I hate the old saying, never up, never in." And I found this fascinating because this is one of these phrases that has stuck around for decades in golf. And the idea is that if you leave a putt short, it's not a good putt. And Harvey Penick totally disagreed with this, because he wrote that if you hit your putts 4, 5, 6, 7 feet by the hole, you're never giving them a chance to go in, because essentially you're making the hole smaller. And worse, you are giving yourself longer putts on the way back to 3-putt. He understood the idea of capture speed, which is essentially the more speed a putt is carrying as it gets closer to the hole, you're effectively shrinking the size of the hole. So Harvey believed that you had to be willing to essentially leave some putts short, and more importantly, your goal is not to get the ball 3, 4, 5 feet by the hole. It's more about it finishing 12 to 18 inches past the hole, and this is really talking about the skill of speed control. This is how you lower your scores, by limiting the amount of 3-putts you have per round, and more importantly, making more putts inside of 10 feet with good speed control and not shrinking the hole because you're hitting it too far past. So don't step up to putts thinking you have to smash it to get it in the hole. It's actually making it harder for yourself. And the last quote that he made about putting that I think is brilliant is this: "Once you adopt a good system for putting, the rest of it is mental. Stay with your system." And there were multiple times in the book that Harvey mentioned the word system in golf and how good it is. I can't tell you how helpful this can be with your putting. For example, in my own putting journey to get better, I kind of created a system for myself. I mentioned on other videos how I use a Seymour putter that helps me with my alignment and even my technique. I have learned aim point for green reading. That is a system that simplifies reading greens for me. And no, it doesn't take 2 minutes. It takes me 10 to 15 seconds to get the read. Whether it's your pre-shot routine, which I kind of hum songs in my head and think about distance control, using aim point, the putter you have, or even a system with your technique. The idea is that you want to give yourself over to this while you're going through your process on the greens. And you can get settled in on the most important things, which is depth perception, having a good read, and being comfortable just to make your stroke and be okay with missing it sometimes, or actually most of the time, because putting's really hard. And yes, putting is disproportionately mental. Now here's another quote that technically is about putting, but it translates to everything in golf. Harvey wrote, "Hole all putts." And essentially what he meant was, don't take gimmies as a crutch, And I would take this even further. For golfers who are taking breakfast balls off the tee from their buddies, maybe they're fluffing their lie-up in the rough sometimes, or essentially taking the easy way out when it's available, you're never gonna develop that toughness and that resolve to deal with pressure in this game. If you avoid difficulty in golf, you're never gonna get better at that thing, and it's gonna kind of haunt you in the back of your mind. So I notice this a lot in tournament golf. When players are used to taking those gimmies from 3, 4, or 5 feet from their buddies when they're playing matches on Saturday morning, and then they go try and play a stroke play qualifying event, whether that's a local tournament or in their club championship, all of a sudden those 3-footers, the hole looks smaller and smaller and they miss a ton of them. And it's just because they've never really put themselves through the challenge of having to make them and standing over the ball, hopefully not thinking about what the putt means and going through their process, going back to the quote earlier. I think this applies to breakfast balls, I think this applies to gimmies, and it could apply to many other things in your golf game where it's easy to kind of gloss over a difficult moment and you say, oh, put me down for a 6 there when it really was a 7 or an 8. So you can think about this and maybe what you're avoiding in your golf game. So in the introduction of the book, Davis Love III wrote something about a really important quote from Harvey that he mentions in the book, which is simple: take dead aim. He wanted golfers to be so obsessed and focused on their target and their intention that it wouldn't give them an opportunity to allow negativity to creep in. How many times have you been stuck frozen over the ball worrying about the bunkers or the water or the trees, and it kind of clouds your mind and you aren't able to actually execute the shot? So going back to the idea of a system, I think this is so important to have a strategic system that you can rely on in golf so that when you step up to the tee or an approach shot or even a wedge shot, you have a quick way to make a decision on your target, club, and most importantly, the type of shot you're going to play. Now, of course, I'll give a plug for my own book, The 4 Foundations of Golf. I try to give you that system and make it incredibly simple so that you can do the thing that he was asking of you. Take dead aim. Look at your target, know it's the right one, and just pull the trigger. This is arguably one of the hardest things in golf to do, and you're never gonna be perfect at it, but the more and more you can rely on strategic decision making and having a system for it that makes it incredibly simple and straightforward, you can step up to the ball with confidence that you have the right shot and target and club in your hand so that you can take dead aim. And it's one of those things where it's a guaranteed way to lower your scores and hit better shots on the course, and just a wonderful piece of what I would call psychological advice. Now, Mr. Penick was very well respected as kind of a mental coach as well by some of his top players like Ben Crenshaw and Tom Kite, who used a lot of his advice to win major championships. And one of the backbones of Harvey's book and his philosophy in general, he wanted to put everything in golf in optimistic terms and avoid the use of negative language. And of course, you know, as a golfer, the path of least resistance is to talk about how poor of a putter you are, or how you can't hit your drive straight, or how you're chunking your irons. And I thought he really brilliantly and simply wrote the difference between confidence and optimism. So confidence is that you know you can hit a shot, and this is more for the skilled player who has more experience in this game, and they know they can hit their driver straight. They know they can hit a crisp chip. They know they can hit a 6-footer under pressure and get it in the hole. Of course, you have to earn that confidence by working on your game through smarter practice. And Harvey even said taking lessons from someone like himself. That's obvious that to get more confidence, you have to put in the work. But he believed that optimism was relevant even for beginner and intermediate players who maybe hadn't put in the work yet or hadn't developed that skill. And really what optimism is to Harvey was believing what's possible. Even if you're someone who is newer to the game or been playing it for a few years, yeah, there's a few iron shots you've struck perfectly, a few drives you've hit down the middle, and a few putts you've made from 10 feet. And just being optimistic on the course and believing what's possible. And essentially he believed you had to use that as a shield to defend against indecision and negativity. And every golfer who's played this game knows that those two things are constantly assaulting our brains. And his belief was that you had to fight it with optimism and confidence when you started to grow that part of your game. This was another piece of advice that was true 100 years ago, and it's true today. I find that most golfers, even myself at times, will default to a negative narrative and storyline about their golf game and what they can't do, versus his belief was kind of flipping that script and having that optimism and thinking, well, things can turn around. I am capable of playing better. And if I could just be more positive, good things will happen. And I believe, again, this is a piece of timeless advice that every golfer could use. So now I'll move along to competitive golf. Harvey had two great quotes here that I think are relevant for experienced tournament players, or even if you're just competing against your buddies. He wrote, "In competition, you must be yourself." Essentially what he was saying was that golfers should not avoid their personality when they compete. Now, when I was a kid and I started competing, I watched Tiger and he was so serious and stoic out there, and I thought I had to be the same way. And when I did that, it backfired on me, but that's not my personality. I like to joke with people. I like to strike up conversations with my playing partners. And Harvey's advice was that you should lean into that. If you like to talk, talk. Obviously, don't go crazy and be a chatterbox the whole round. And if you're a more serious and introverted golfer, then maybe don't try and talk to everyone and be cracking jokes, because that's not you. And in his era, he had Ben Hogan as an example of a very serious golfer that other players tried to emulate, and it didn't work out for them. So I think that whether you're competing under pressure or even any golfer who's just looking to get better at this game, you have to find the bridge between your personality off the course and find the optimal way to behave on the course. We shouldn't avoid our DNA and our personality. It should be part of our golf game. And the next quote that he had on competition, which I thought was absolutely brilliant, is that you should avoid new or different things that will distract your mind from your normal routine. So one of the most common questions that I get on social media or in my email inbox is, "Hey John, I'm playing this big tournament tomorrow. What should I do differently?" So a lot of golfers think that they can cram for the test by doing something new and different before they compete. And I always tell them that, hey, you essentially got what you got and you have to lean into that. When the pressure is on, everything gets stripped away from your golf game and you're left with the most basic things. So if you think you can go out there and maybe execute a new shot that you only started practicing 2 days prior, or maybe a new mental thought, whatever it is that's different from what you're used to, it's probably going to backfire. So to become a better competitive player, you need to compete a lot. You need to go through all the ups and downs, build your routine, build your intentions, and build that scar tissue of when things go poorly so that you have more experience and you can lean into that. And if you don't have the experience, then you have to be open to all of this when you compete, and that things will happen that maybe wouldn't happen on a normal Saturday round with your buddies. You might shank a few shots, you might miss a 2-footer, you might hit 3 balls out of bounds. It's totally normal, and competition is difficult. But again, the worst thing you do is think that you can cram for the test and do something entirely outside your skill set or your personality the day of the tournament and expect it to really pay off, because it won't. All right, so I'm gonna make my way through the final few quotes quickly because there's so much gold in this book that I don't wanna overlook. The next quote Harvey had was, "A golfer must make every effort to maintain good physical condition. Walk at every opportunity." Now I know my friends who are watching this in the UK and places like Australia, walking is part of golf and you actually can't even ride a cart on most of your courses. But here in America, a lot of golfers are used to riding on the course, and I just think that walking the course is one of the best ways to get amazing exercise. You can get 4, 5, or 6 miles of exercise without even thinking about it because you're so focused on the golf. I think it's a better experience in this game. I think it helps you focus better and make better decisions. So I am a huge proponent of walking. Harvey certainly was too, and I think that this was one of the best quotes in the book. And I just want to bring it up because at every opportunity I get, I wish more golfers would walk the course. Obviously, if you're physically capable of doing it, and some courses I understand will not allow you to do it, which is a bummer in my opinion. Now, the next quote that I thought was kind of hilarious because this advice has been around for decades and you still hear golfers saying it to one another is the following: "Keeping the head down prevents a good follow through because the golfer can't swing past hip high with the head still down and not give up something good in the finish to do it. So Harvey hated the idea of keeping your head down because it's not a great intent in the golf swing. So stop telling your buddies at the range or on the course to do it. It's usually not a great idea. And I think it was kind of funny that the quote was right there in the middle of the book. Now here's another quote that I thought was actually kind of funny / controversial, because this was written decades ago, and now we still have a debate in the golf world about technology. Mr. Penick wrote, "These days there is a growing feeling that high-tech equipment, the juiced up ball, and the powerful swing of the touring pros are making many of our finest old courses obsolete." So I'm not going to debate the proposed rollback or this issue in general on this video. We're getting to the end here, but I just thought it was interesting that when he wrote this decades ago, it was an issue to him and some others, and 30, 40, 50 years later, we're still arguing about this. Now, some people might say that this is an opportunity that we have to take to actually do something about it because we've been talking about it for years. Or someone else could say, well, it was a problem back then. There's books that were written in even the 1800s that mention this. So you could also say, well, it's been there over 100 years ago and it's not going to change now. But I'll leave it up to you to debate in the comment section if you want. Now, the last quote I'll leave you with is perhaps one of my favorites, just about how this game is a gift to us all, and it actually could be a psychologist. Harvey wrote, "Playing golf, you learn a form of meditation. For the 4 hours you are on the course, you learn to focus on the game and clean your mind of worrisome thoughts. Golf has probably kept more people sane than psychiatrists have." So if you know me, you know that I love this game. I've loved it my entire life, and I can vouch for this, that golf has kept me from going insane at times, and yes, it has driven me insane at times. But needless to say, this is a special game, and to be quite honest with you, I feel bad for people who don't love golf the way that I do and you do. It is a great form of therapy to be out there in nature, and it's even more important today being away from technology. So yes, even decades later, I think Harvey would be really happy to know that golf is a good form of therapy for all of us. So I haven't even covered most of what's in this book. It's actually not even that thick. You could read it in a day or two, but I just think this is something that every golfer who is serious about getting better or even wants to be a happier golfer should have this copy. You should read it every few years to be reminded of some of these amazing insights that Harvey had. He was one of the best coaches ever. I've certainly learned a lot from him, and I want to make sure that these ideas exist forever. So go on Amazon, get your copy, or if you have it and it's collecting dust somewhere in your house like it was for me, give it a read again, and there's plenty more insights that I have not even mentioned on this video. Thanks again for making it this far as usual, and don't miss my last video where I talk about how you can reduce the amount of double bogeys that are killing your golf game.